The Haunting of the Tower of London. I never believed in ghosts, not until I spent a night in the Tower of London. My name is Emily, and this is my story. It all began when I was invited to join a special historical research project at the Tower. As a history major, this was a dream come true. The Tower of London, with its rich and bloody history, had always fascinated me. Little did I know, I was about to become part of its dark legend. The project required us to stay overnight in the tower, documenting our experiences and any unusual occurrences. I arrived on a chilly October evening, the air thick with the promise of rain. The ancient stone walls of the tower loomed ominously against the darkening sky, and I felt a shiver of excitement and apprehension. We were a small group of researchers, led by Dr. Harris, a renowned historian with a passion for the paranormal. He greeted us warmly and led us to our quarters in the Queen's House, one of the oldest and most haunted buildings in the Tower complex. As we settled in, Dr. Harris briefed us on the history of the Tower and its many ghostly inhabitants. He spoke of Anne Boleyn, the ill-fated queen who was beheaded on Tower Green, and whose headless ghost was said to roam the grounds. He told us of the two young princes, Edward V. and Richard, who were murdered in the bloody tower, and whose spirits were often seen huddled together in fear. But it was the story of the White Lady that intrigued me the most. According to legend, she was a noblewoman imprisoned in the tower for reasons unknown. She was said to appear in the White Tower, her presence heralded by the overpowering scent of old perfume. Many had seen her, but none had ever discovered her true identity. As night fell, we began our investigation. Armed with cameras, voice recorders, and EMF detectors, we split into pairs and set off to explore the tower. I was paired with Mark, a fellow researcher with a keen interest in the supernatural. Our first stop was the bloody tower. The narrow, winding staircase creaked under our feet as we ascended to the room where the princes were believed to have been murdered. The air was cold and heavy, and I felt a sense of unease as we entered the small, dimly lit chamber. We set up our equipment and began our vigil. Hours passed with no sign of activity, and I was beginning to think the stories were just that, stories. But then, just as I was about to suggest we move on, I had it. A faint, whispering voice. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my heart pounding. Mark nodded, his eyes wide with excitement. It sounded like a child's voice. We listened intently, but the voice did not return. We decided to review the recordings later and moved on to the next location, the White Tower. The White Tower was even more imposing at night, its ancient stones seeming to absorb the light from our flashlights. We made our way to the upper floors, where the White Lady was said to appear. The scent of old perfume hit us as soon as we entered the room, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "Do you smell that?" I whispered. Mark nodded, his face pale. "It's her, the White Lady." We set up our equipment and waited. The minutes ticked by, and the scent grew stronger. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and I saw a faint, glowing figure in the corner of the room. She was beautiful, with long, flowing hair and a sad, haunted expression. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure did not respond. She simply stood there, watching us with those sorrowful eyes. I felt a wave of sympathy for her and took a step closer. "Please, tell us your story," I said softly. The figure began to fade, and I felt a sense of desperation. "Wait, don't go." But it was too late. She was gone, and the room was silent once more. We spent the rest of the night exploring the tower, but nothing else happened. As dawn broke, we returned to the Queen's House, exhausted and exhilarated. We reviewed our recordings and found several instances of unexplained voices and noises, but the most compelling evidence was the footage of the White Lady. Dr. Harris was thrilled with our findings and encouraged us to continue our research. Over the next few weeks, we spent many nights in the tower, documenting our experiences and trying to uncover the truth behind the hauntings. But as time went on, I began to feel a growing sense of unease. The tower seemed to be watching us, its ancient walls closing in. I started having nightmares about the White Lady, her sad eyes pleading with me for help. One night, as I was reviewing our latest recordings, I heard a voice whisper my name. I looked up, but there was no one there. The room was empty, but I could feel a presence, cold and menacing. "Emily," the voice whispered again, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned off the recorder and stood up, my heart pounding. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty room. There was no response, but I could feel the presence growing stronger. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way to the door, determined to find out what was happening. As I stepped into the hallway, I saw her, the White Lady. She stood at the end of the corridor, her eyes fixed on me. I felt a wave of fear and sympathy wash over me as I approached her. "Please, tell me what you want," I said, my voice trembling. She did not speak, but I felt her sadness and desperation. She reached out her hand, and I felt a cold, clammy touch on my skin. I shivered, but I did not pull away. "Show me," I whispered. Suddenly, I was no longer in the hallway. I was in a dark, cold cell, the walls damp and covered in moss. The White Lady stood before me, her eyes filled with tears. "This is where I died," she said, her voice echoing in the small space. I felt a wave of sorrow wash over me as I looked around the cell. "What happened to you?" I asked. She began to speak, her voice filled with pain and regret. "I was imprisoned here for a crime I did not commit. I was accused of treason and sentenced to death, but I was innocent. I died alone in this cold, dark cell, and my spirit has been trapped here ever since." I felt tears streaming down my face as I listened to her story. "I'm so sorry," I said, my voice choked with emotion. "Is there anything I can do to help you?" She looked at me with those sad, haunted eyes. "Remember me," she said softly. "Tell my story. Let the world know that I was innocent." I nodded, my heart breaking for her. "I will," I promised. "I will tell your story." She smiled, a faint, sad smile, and began to fade. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she was gone. I found myself back in the hallway, my heart pounding and my mind racing. I knew what I had to do. I had to tell her story, to let the world know the truth about the White Lady of the Tower of London. Over the next few weeks, I poured myself into my research, uncovering the details of her life and death. I wrote articles, gave interviews, and shared her story with anyone who would listen. And as I did, I felt a sense of peace, knowing that I was helping to set her spirit free. The Tower of London is still a place of mystery and intrigue, its ancient walls holding countless secrets. But for me, it will always be the place where I met the White Lady and where I learned the true meaning of compassion and justice. As I delved deeper into the history of the Tower of London, I uncovered more about the White Lady's tragic past. Her name was Lady Eleanor Grey, a noblewoman who had been falsely accused of treason during the turbulent times of the Tudor reign. She had been a pawn in a political game, betrayed by those she trusted. I spent countless hours in the archives, piecing together her story. Lady Eleanor had been a kind and gentle soul, beloved by those who knew her. Her only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in the crossfire of a power struggle she had no part in. One night, as I was poring over old documents in the tower's library, I felt a familiar chill in the air. The scent of old perfume filled the room, and I knew she was there. "Lady Eleanor," I whispered, looking around the dimly lit room. "I found your story. I know what happened to you." The air grew colder, and I saw her standing by the window, her eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you," she said softly, "for remembering me." I felt a lump in my throat as I approached her. You deserve to be remembered, I said. And I will make sure your story is told. She smiled, a sad, wistful smile. I can finally rest, she said. But there is one more thing you must know. I felt a shiver of anticipation. What is it? I asked. She looked out the window, her expression distant. There is another spirit here, one who is not at peace. He was the one who betrayed me, and his soul is trapped in this place, tormented by his guilt. I felt a chill run down my spine. Who is he? I asked. Sir Richard, she said, her voice filled with a mix of anger and pity. He was my betrothed, but he betrayed me to save himself. He thought he could escape his fate, but his soul was bound to this place, just as mine was. I felt a surge of determination. I will find him, I said, and I will help him find peace. She looked at me with a mixture of hope and sadness. Be careful, she warned. He is not like me. His spirit is filled with anger and regret. He may not want your help. I nodded, my resolve unwavering. I will be careful, I promised, and I will do whatever it takes to set him free. With that, she began to fade, her form dissolving into the shadows. Thank you, she whispered, and then she was gone. I spent the next few days researching Sir Richard, uncovering the details of his life and his betrayal. He had been a trusted advisor to the king, but his ambition had led him to betray Lady Eleanor, hoping to gain favor and power. Instead, he had been executed for his treachery, his soul condemned to wander the tower for eternity. One night, I decided to confront him. I made my way to the bloody tower, where he was said to appear. The air was thick with tension as I entered the dark, narrow chamber. I could feel his presence, cold and menacing. Sir Richard, I called out, my voice echoing in the empty room. I know who you are. I know what you did. The air grew colder, and I saw a shadowy figure in the corner of the room. His eyes glowed with a malevolent light, and I felt a wave of fear wash over me. You cannot help me, he hissed, his voice filled with anger and despair. I am beyond redemption. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the fear. You betrayed Lady Eleanor, I said, my voice steady. But you can still find peace. You can still make amends. He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. And how do you propose I do that? He sneered. By telling the truth, I said. By admitting your guilt and seeking forgiveness. He looked at me with a mixture of anger and sorrow. It is too late for that, he said. I am condemned to this place, forever tormented by my actions. It is never too late, I said firmly. You can still find redemption. You can still make things right. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes filled with a mix of emotions. Finally, he sighed, a sound filled with centuries of regret. Very well, he said. I will tell my story. Over the next few hours, he recounted his life, his ambitions, and his betrayal of Lady Eleanor. He spoke of his regret and his torment, and I could see the weight of his guilt lifting as he confessed his sins. When he was finished, I felt a sense of relief and closure. Thank you, I said softly. You have done the right thing.